In 1993, the World Conference on Human Rights took place exactly 30 years ago. It was an extraordinary event bringing together member states, international organizations, and social activists from all over the world to discuss a future agenda for human rights. Initially, there was skepticism since situations in specific countries was banned from the agenda. But people came nevertheless and filled the corridors with information and displays. As one sat through the conference, there was so much aspiration and a sense that everything was possible. The Vienna Declaration and Program of Action emerged from the conference and led to the creation of the office of the now very prominent High Commissioner for Human Rights. The declaration did represent the international consensus of the 1990s. There were two important themes to come out of the conference. One was the concept of indivisibility, that economic, social, and cultural rights are indivisible from civil and political rights. The second, the idea that women's rights are human rights, and that this should be the overarching framework for advocacy on women's issues. The organization that steered this pathbreaking work on women's rights are human rights was the Center for Women's Leadership at Rutgers University under the guidance of Charlotte Bunch, who in 1990 had written an iconic piece spelling out this concept. The center began an international petition for Vienna Conference to recognize women's rights as human rights and to take action against violence against women. By the time of the conference, in days without social media, they collected over 600,000 signatures from 123 countries. The planners also decided to have a World Women's Tribunal, where victim survivors from all over the world would come and give their testimony of their experiences of violence. This is extremely unusual for a UN community that early focused on issues of women's equality and discrimination in very technical ways. Perhaps one of the most riveting moments of the tribunal was listening to the comfort women of Japanese occupation who were now in their 80s describe their experience of sexual slavery during World War II. Today, victim survivors giving public testimony is not an uncommon thing, but in the 1990s, in that climate of shame and unease, it was considered very unusual, and much of the audience was listening to this kind of testimony for the first time at an official United Nations conference. Women's rights are human rights then became the cry of the decade and the main mobilization framework for women's issues. There were two pillars of transformation under the drive for women's rights emanating from that era. The first pillar was the movement to create international frameworks and actions for fighting violence against women. Today, practically every donor and every important NGO has a project on violence against women, either in terms of service delivery, advocacy, or research. Yet, until the 1990s, violence against women was a taboo subject, never really broached at the local level, and with no interest at the international level.